Okay, everyone. First, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to participate in today's webinar. We're going to get things started. In the first instance, just wanted to introduce myself for those of you who are participating today that I have not had the chance to meet. My name is Bill Mulligan, and I am the Group President of Cordium. Our presentation today is expected to last, depending on questions, call it I don't know, 30 to 40 minutes, 30 to 35 minutes. As you can see on the screen that we have up right now in today's webinar, we're more than happy to answer questions. In that regard, we're happy to answer them either during the presentation, if they come up as we're going through different aspects. At the end of the presentation, we'll ask for questions. And frankly, we're happy to answer questions after the presentation. If anybody would like to either submit a question to us via email or via phone. It could be as simple as emailing me at bill@cordium.com, and I'll be happy to get the questions answered. With respect to asking questions during, you'll see there's a box on your screen that allows you to submit questions, so feel free to submit a question there, and myself or one of my colleagues here at Cordium will help get that question to my attention, and we will do our best to answer all questions that are posed during today's webinar. So with that, we will hit the title of today's presentation, which is the role of technology in the ever-expanding world of employee supervision. I would say at the outset, this is going to be a relatively broad topic that we're going to cover today. We're not going to get into a lot of granularity on actual technical functionality from an IT or a coding perspective, more bigger picture concepts of what employee supervision programs should look like and trying to dovetail that into how technology can play a role. Quickly, we will cover the agenda for today. We're going to do an introduction to Cordium. We're going to focus a little bit on today's presentation. We'll then go through some of our thinking on why employee supervision is so important. What are the key elements of an employee supervision program? And frankly, what role can technology play and how can it help? So that takes us to Cordium. So before we dive into the substance of the presentation, I wanted to give you some information about Cordium. Cordium is a global compliance and risk firm that's active in both the consulting space and the software solution space. With respect to our consulting services, we provide proactive compliance and risk management consulting support services to over 300 private fund firm, investment advisors, broker-dealers, and other institutions with over $1 trillion in assets under management, and that's just in the U.S. On a global basis, we're working with closer to 1,000 clients. In addition to our compliance consulting, we're a global leading provider of software solutions focused primarily on compliance workflow management and, lo and behold, employee supervision, which includes policy management and personal trading. Cordium's got close to 400 software customers with well over 16,000 employee users of Cordium's employee supervision solution. Clients include firms with as little as 5 or 10 employees with as high as 2,000 employees. From a staffing perspective, Cordium's got about 75 people working in our U.S. offices and about 125 people working outside the U.S. for a global total of about 200 employees. Our amazing team works from offices in New York City, Boston, San Francisco, London, Malta, and Hong Kong. Today I'm actually speaking to you from our office in San Francisco. Focus of today's presentation, where are we going with it? I guess at the outset, sort of talking about what it's not and backing ourselves into what it is. You know, we're not limiting ourselves to the concept of talking about employee-related risk in the areas of cybersecurity and/or data protection. They're very important parts, but they're parts of a much bigger issue. In addition, although we will use quite a bit of examples from the financial industry or the securities industry, we're going beyond that, and maybe more of the more explicit duty to supervise applicable to certain players in that space. And it definitely is going beyond, although we will touch on it quite a bit, and it is an important piece of the puzzle, focusing on issues around employees and monitoring personal trading at financial services firms. The focus today is on the sort of the holistic need to really think about and evaluate how your firm can demonstrate that it is properly supervising its employees. And frankly, and although this is something that is implicit in a lot of the work that we do and maybe not as explicit, providing protection for the firm, which includes the firm, all of its employees, its shareholders. A key issue, which is sort of an unfortunate aspect of what we're going to talk about a lot today, is that a lot of what we're going to talk about is this need for the firm to demonstrate that it's doing what it say it's doing to protect the firm, and sometimes that will be sort of at the detriment, which I guess is okay, for employees that are actually doing bad things and frankly going outside of what we will refer to, and will be a recurring theme of, off the reservation from a program perspective. So that leads us into slide 8, and we're sort of going to review in the first instance, frankly, why is employee supervision so important? And this gets at the point that I made at the outset. Really, regardless of the industry that you're in, and frankly, regardless whether there's a stated duty to supervise, although it's quite a broad concept, really all firms, whether you be security firms, whether you be restaurants, whether you be pharmaceutical firms, whether you be social media firms, are really going to want to be able to effectively demonstrate that they're properly supervising their employees. And really why, and this has been true in the work that we've done at Cordium, and frankly I think other players that are involved in the space, that one of the biggest risks that pretty much every firm out there faces is employee risk. And sort of what is employee risk, and how would you go about defining employee risk? I mean, looked it up, and one definition is, which is on the screen, is employee risk is defined as counterproductive behavior, whether inadvertent, negligent, or malicious, that can cause harm to a firm. What you will see, although it is very important for compliance program and employee supervision programs to make clear what type of negligent and or malicious behavior is not accepted and not permitted, one of the more important things is to really eliminate the likelihood of inadvertent counterproductive behavior or the perception of inadvertent counterproductive behavior, because in those scenarios it could create liability for the firm, especially if an employee has a strong argument that they didn't realize what they're doing was counterproductive. And it was so inadvertent because they weren't giving proper instructions and detailed out a set of rules. So how does this sort of, from a high-level perspective, how does a supervisory program that's working well help mitigate to employee risk? I think in the big picture, it's really providing a clear record of and a regular focus on a set of clear rules, which can include training and policies and procedures and follow-through. And I'm using this term a couple times, and those of you who have, are either clients of the firm or have met me at one time or another, I tend to use this term a lot. It creates an objective standard of what it means to be off the reservation. Ideally, and this is the quote I also use, at the end of the day, you can't truly prevent bad people from doing bad things, and that includes employees of a firm. But what you can do is make it clear that when people are going off the reservation, they are doing the opposite thereof what is told to them. They are not following rules. They are misrepresenting things. What happens is problematic is if you don't have a strong program, you haven't developed that kind of specificity and clarity and check-in, and we're going to be talking about these issues today, it can be unclear whether they knew they were off the reservation or not, and whether it was inadvertent due to lack of supervision, inadvertent due to lack of instruction. So really what we want to do and what you want to do in developing a program, well, regardless of what your industry is you want to make it clear to regulators as applicable to your business, to shareholders and the outside world, that the employee in question that did something that was arguably off the reservation was, for lack of a better term and using a simplistic label, a bad person who knowingly operated outside accepted boundaries. Now that takes us to what is our thinking, or what is Cordium's thinking around what are the key elements of an a good employee supervision program? I'm sure if you ask a number of people, you're going to get, there's no right answer. You're probably going to get some different viewpoints, but we at Cordium believe that good employee supervision programs tend to have these 7 general characteristics, and we'll sort of go through each one of them. One is it creates a culture of compliance. This program creates a sense of that those really magic words that everybody uses, a culture of compliance. The program should inform and educate. The program should be uniquely designed and tailored to the risks of the business. The program should require frequent, transparent communication from employees. The program should monitor, track, and report. The program should require employees to commit to the program. And the program should have consequences for violations. Let's start to get to these in a little bit more detail, and let's start with the first key element in creating a culture of compliance. I mean, in the first instance, we really need to understand that a culture is really well beyond the written rules that you receive, and hopefully you're not receiving only at the start of your employment at a firm and only reviewed when hired. And here I refer to that example of firms. There are quite a few out there in different industries where the example is the employee receives a 200-page loose leaf binder provided when they're hired with a bunch of policies and procedures that are not terribly up to date and haven't been reviewed terribly recently, and they take that loose leaf binder and they lock it in their desk. That's not where you want to end into. And it is definitely also beyond just physical or IT security. You really need to create a culture of transparency and sensitivity to compliance. That means you need to have resources that are dedicated not only to building it out, maintaining it, operating it. You also should be focusing around training and employee education, as well as tone for the top. That culture, which is a very important piece, is got to get buy-in from the management of the firm, whether that's an investment advisory firm, a broker-dealer firm, a pharmaceutical firm, a social media firm, whatnot, a restaurant. The other thing that it's got to deal with, and I think it's going to be a recurring theme of today's presentation, is going to be the need for both cultures of compliance as well as programs to be dynamic. They cannot be static. They need to be set up in a way that they change and they evolve. Because just like other types of cultures, whether it's a music culture, an alt culture, some other cultures, they're always changing. They're always evolving, because if they're not able to change, then they tend to die off. And you don't want a culture of compliance to die off. So you want to make sure that it's got to change. And part of that is it's got to require regular interaction with employees. That culture is something they need to interact with on a regular basis, if not a daily basis. And most importantly, the culture has got to become part of the fabric of the firm. Okay, looks like we've got a question. I'll try to answer it before we get on to the next screen. The question is, what would require and or trigger a change to the culture, or i.e. why would you need to change your culture? I guess my first feedback would be there are probably quite a few instances where you may need to change it. I think speaking to a culture and or a program, I think one common example would be potentially failures of a culture or failure or violations of a program. If you have problems that arise inside of your culture of compliance, or potential violations of your compliance program, arguably it would reflect the fact that either the culture, the program, or the procedures and or policies that make up the culture and program are not fit for purpose. And that's what we've seen in regulators that we've interacted in, is they will say, hey, the fact that you've got a number of these instances with me seeing what you're working with is not working. Some other examples would be, number one, changes in a business. Obviously, if you develop a culture and a program around a business and then your business changes a change in direction, you decide to do something differently, you're in the investment business, you follow a new investment strategy, you're in another business that you decide to enter into a new jurisdiction, there may be changes in the business that will trigger required changes in your program and culture, as well as changes in laws and rules. With that, we'll move over to our next sort of key element, which we talk about. This program needs to inform and educate. In the first instance, and this is clearly where technology can play a role, it's got to make it easy access or a portal for employees to get access to the written policies and procedures and the rules. So it's easily accessible in the first instance to see the rules. It's easily able for the compliance team and the management to update and review the rules. So it's got to be that first piece of the informant and educating is access. We put on the screen up here just some sort of common areas in which you will have policy and procedure management around operational procedures, compliance manuals, codes of ethics, code of conduct, IT controls and cybersecurity, data protection controls. It could cover sexual harassment, workplace safety, and vendor management. Staying on this topic of a key element being informing and educating, part of it, and you'll see us reference this through the fact, part of the inform and educating process is you should use technology in a way to confirm that the people have been informed and educated. And definitely in the financial services industry and whether it be advisors or broker-dealers, you're going to see a lot of work around attestations where employees are saying, look, I have been informed, I have been educated, I have had the opportunity to answer questions. In addition to that, the attestation, there should be a role where technology can play around regular education on specific topics, specific policies and procedures, whether it be whatever is applicable to your business from a topic standpoint. And that could be sort of general education, it could be specific training, it could also be an element of testing where we want to test that people are understanding sort of the informational and education process of the program. Looks like we got another question. Let me try to answer it quick before we move on to the next one. Why do attestations need to be so frequent? I guess my first reaction is I'm not sure that it has to be ever so frequent, or we were meant to imply that, although we clearly mentioned monthly, quarterly, annual. But again, I guess the issue of it being a periodic element is it's that recurring theme of change. As things change, you need to get back out in front of the employees and to make sure they understand what's going on. One example of an area where I could see, and this does link back to the financial services industry and investment advisors and broker-dealers in particular, is around where employee supervision deals with the conflict that can arise in certain industries around personal trading. And obviously, if somebody can at different times during the year open up personal accounts that arguably could create potential conflicts of interest, it needs to be periodic and frequent in questions to make sure they're not opening new accounts that have not otherwise been reported into the compliance system. Looks like we got one other question, and I'll quickly answer that before we move on to the next one. What are common examples of training areas? I guess the most common we're seeing these days, cybersecurity, which are applicable to not necessarily to just the financial services industry. I mean, it's not just advisors or broker-dealers or banks, but that could be pharmaceutical companies, social media companies, other service companies. Another common area is AML. Another common area, which although arguably related to cybersecurity, is data protection. And another area that's really common is FCPA, which is Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and that training tends to be around firms that are really active in engaging either foreign governments or foreign government-controlled businesses or foreign government-controlled funds on how they're dealing with them around, on the one hand, obviously, is the obvious of you should not be bribing them, but then maybe the less so obvious is when do certain sort of entertaining and gifts and whatnot rise to the level of being potentially problematic. Let me move on to sort of the next key element of a employee supervision program, culture of compliance. It's got to be uniquely designed and tailored for the risks of the business. This is absolutely key, in my view. It's something that I think people that have had exposure to me here at Cordium have heard. It's just got to be unique, and this is particularly prevalent, unfortunately, or historically has been prevalent in the business where people would go out and get off the shelf manuals or off the shelf or borrow somebody else's manual and put their name on it. It's just really got to be unique. And one of the key things, which is this recurring theme that I talk about, is it's got to be unique as it changes over time, because that uniqueness may change over time. So, I put what was meant to be slightly funny is, we use this term tailor. Lots of times people's bodies change and they've got to go back to the tailor to ensure that their clothes fit. And so do businesses, and so do compliance programs, and so do employee supervision programs. Investment advisors are different from broker-dealers, and both of those firms are different from pharmaceutical firms, and pharmaceutical firms are different from social media companies, and so on, that we need to focus on that. Staying on this topic of making sure that the firm is uniquely designed and tailored for the risk of the business, where does one start to ensure that you can create a program that is unique? And again, I think people who are familiar with the firm, this will not be a new concept, but the way that we really think about doing it and have done for over a decade and working with our various financial services firm clients is you take an inventory of risks related to the business. And sometimes it's helpful really to do this in a vacuum when you either start working at a firm or you start having a relationship with the firm, and you sort of say, look, what are our compliance inventory items? Personal trading, annual reviews, best execute, whatever it is. And then you really make sure, but that could be for other companies. It could be where, pharmaceutical companies. But you really make sure when you create the program that you basically almost got a line item that you attach each inventory item to an aspect of the program or an aspect of the culture to say that is meant to address that inventory item. You almost map them out. And again, that recurring theme of it needs to be reviewed because your inventory can change from time to time. And you want to make sure, and you see definitely among in particular, our investment advisor clients that are active in the United States, they're going to be reviewing their program on an annual basis and making sure they don't necessarily need to add inventory items as it relates to what should be addressed by their compliance program. Looks like we've got another question, and I'll try to answer this quickly and move on to the next slide. What are examples of unique compliance inventory items? Good question. I guess the first thing I would say would be inventory items that are triggered by applicable regulations and regulators and rules. And again, we're meant to be a bit of a broad discussion today. So in the first instance, you're going to have unique inventory items if you're registered with the SEC as an investment advisor. You'll map them generally back to the Investment Advisors Act. Same would be true for a firm that happens to be registered with the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Same would be true for firms that are broker-dealers and members of FINRA. Same would be true if you're in the UK and it's the FCA or the SFC, or let's say you're regulated by the Food and Drug Administration or the FDIC or the Federal Reserve Board or a state regulatory agency. That's where you're going to start your unique items as a function of exactly what are the registrations applicable to the business and how do they key to different inventory items. And sometimes that's in the same industry. Like we mentioned, CFTC, SEC, and FINRA. There are some firms that all of those risks are applicable to, and some of them it will not be because they're not registered. I think some other key areas where you're going to have unique, but I mean, there's many more. I mean, if you're an investment advisor, they could be related to the types of instruments you trade. It could be a comparison of the instruments that your clients trade versus are they even possible instruments that your employees can trade, because that might be a unique part that you may be more sort of permissive in employee trading if they can't trade in the types of instruments that you solely trade in. But some other ones are like, do you have an affiliate that you can transact business with? So we have some clients that are investment advisors that have affiliated broker-dealers. Their compliance program and their employee supervision program and everything they're doing from an oversight perspective is going to be unique to that. Same thing will be true. You might have some programs which, let's say maybe you have, and I use the word key, but I don't know if it necessarily has to be key, but you've got employees that have relationships with vendors that you might use. Again, you might want to develop that supervision program and that compliance program in such a way that it's unique to address those types of relationships. That's going to lead us to the next, what we see as a key element. And again, we're going to keep returning to this theme of the fact that the programs need to be designed, and it needs to be clear to the regulators that are looking at the programs, maybe as well as the shareholders or potential shareholders or potential business partners of these firms, that they contemplate that they need to change. They need to be dynamic. They need to be able to modify. But this gets at a point I've made earlier, and it's key to really that sort of the creation of a strong culture of compliance, is that it's got to require frequent, transparent communications from the employees up into the program administrators or the internal compliance team. It's really got to be a regular part of an employee's work life to deal with the compliance program. Number one, you want to demonstrate that the firm and the program's administrators or the compliance team are regularly reminding the employees of the importance of the compliance program and their obligations under it. You want to make it very difficult for somebody to claim ignorance. And as I said, if you work at a firm where you hear about the program the day that you get hired, and you never really hear about it again, it's easy to claim ignorance. And then it's easy for somebody to look at that if problems arise with this employee that can easily claim ignorance, that it's not their fault, it's the firm's fault because they didn't stay on top of me. And that's not a place where you want to be. Clearly, you want to require this frequent, transparent communication because, again, circumstances could change that presents issues under a company's compliance program related to potential conflicts of interest. Things are going to change. So let's say, in the first the first year of a program, a firm's never talking to any sort of state-related investment agencies. And so they're not really worried about political contributions, notwithstanding the pay-to-play rules saying, look, these types of agencies are not going to talk to us. But in the second year, they start talking to them. Well, now you need that communication with employees because now you need to sort of say, look, guys, we didn't really worry about your political contributions last year because there really weren't big consequences, but now there are potential consequences under it. Again, as well as the change in time, and you need that frequent communication because it could change the way the company thinks about its approach to required disclosures or training or things they want to question employees about, because things could arise where you have problems under the program or there's a change in law or a change in business activity. Looks like we've got another question. Let me try to answer this before we move off this page. What are the common conflicts of interest? What are common conflicts of interest for employees? I think we've talked about some of them. Clearly, For securities firms, I would say investment advisors and broker-dealers, personal trading is going to be a big one. Could it overlap with employees? Could that present any significant conflicts of interest? I would say gifts and business entertainment, the receipt of that, to the extent that anything was received by an employee that was meant to affect their judgment in making decisions as it relates to their operation of their job. I think to the extent employees are permitted to engage in outside business activities, that could be an issue. Do those outside business activities present any conflicts? One common one with some of our securities investment firm clients is, does somebody maybe on your portfolio team also work for, you know, a charitable foundation, the investment arm of a charitable foundation? Well, how does that potentially involve the things that they are doing for the firm and clients of the firm? And a point I mentioned earlier is relationships with vendors. Again, like, you know, it is, you know, some of these industries are small, people know each other, and do you have any outside relationships with personnel at vendors of the firm that could arguably or be positioned in such a way to call into question an employee's judgment as it relates to using those vendors on behalf of clients of the firm? So that's going to take us to our next key element. The program's got to be set up, and this is obviously a very big area where technology comes into play, to be able to properly monitor, track, and report. Clearly, for a program to work, I think on the resource end, which would be from a technology end of things, and from a personnel end, which will be the people that are driving the technology, they've got to have the resources to play that, you know, you're monitoring what's going on in the system, you're tracking how employees are complying with the system, you're evaluating data they're submitting as part of the operation of the program, and there's some concept of reporting, whether the administrators, the compliance team is reporting into management on as to what is going on. You really have to be in a position, and the program's got to be in a position, and this frankly is where technology can play a big role, because it can streamline this whole monitoring, tracking, and reporting process so it doesn't become so onerous via paper or a complex web of spreadsheets that you're easily able to show that you're monitoring, tracking, reporting. One of the most dangerous things is to operate a program, even if it's required, to collect a lot of data that you're not evaluating, you're not monitoring, you're not making decisions, and you're not acting on, because that could be very dangerous for the firm. And firms that are required to have the programs, you just got to do it, because not acting on that data that's coming into the system could definitely be problematic. That'll lead us to our next slide. One of the other, I think the 7 characteristics I were referring to is it requires ongoing commitment from employees. This is obviously, you know, we're going to touch on some of the same topics on attestations, whether it be annual, quarterly, monthly, questionnaires, filing reports. Again, for me, what I'm trying to get at this point is it goes beyond just the communication. It's actually the way I would use it to use a term that is more applicable to people that are in marital relationships. It's a renewing of the vows, right? It's like, look, I made this commitment to the program when I came in. I agreed to live, and I don't think it's such a bad idea to require people to renew those vows on a periodic basis. I am committed to the program. I'm going to give you the information you're required in these questionnaires. I'm going to be giving you these reports on a monthly and quarterly basis, and I'm committed to what's in it. The same thing is true as a commitment. I'm not, you know, I'm attending and participating in training sessions. I'm going to, whether they be in person, online, whatnot. Again, what we're trying to do, and it's sort of an unfortunate element on one hand, but a required piece, is developing these employee supervision programs. You really got to be doing it from the concept that not only are you doing it because it's good for the business, but you wanted to make it very clear that in that unfortunate instance when a problem arises, it's a function, I'm going to use that same term again, it's somebody going off the reservation. You can't argue you didn't know what your job was. You can't argue you didn't know what the commitment you made was. You can't argue that you didn't know that was wrong, and in fact, you may have withheld information from us that you knew was wrong. But there's no ambiguity. It's not gray. We've asked you about it. We make you to commit to it on a regular basis. So if you went out and did something, it's not because you were ignorant or confused or anything along those lines. It's because you knew what you did was wrong. And that's why in those situations where those programs operating well, the consequences or the big problem is for the employee that went off the reservation, not the firm. And why is that good? Well, because that protects the firm. That protects the 99.9% of the other employees that are not doing the wrong thing and not going off the reservation. That protects the clients that that firm services. That protects the shareholders and owners of that firm. And it ensures that that firm stays around and keeps employing lots of people and lets those people pay their mortgages and their bills and their tuitions. So again, it's an unfortunate element, but that's why that regular commitment. And that's also, too, why technology plays a role, because you can make all these things that arguably were onerous at times a lot easier and a lot more streamlined. That takes us to what is the last characteristic of the 7 that we discussed that needs to be a key element of an employee supervision program. And again, and not necessarily, this is probably an area that, frankly, technology doesn't play a role in because it's more decision-making. But there needs to be consequences for violations. So as painful as it may be, the program needs to have teeth. There needs to be consequences. You can't be in a situation where you're making exception after exception for violation. You've got to draw the line at times. I don't know how harsh it needs to be, but they do need to be. Looks like we got a question there. What are examples of penalties for violations? I guess probably the area that we've seen them the most frequently, if I'm being honest, would be around employee supervision programs where you're required to monitor personal trading. What I think we've seen is when people have violated certain aspects of that, whether that be failing to pre-clear something, failing to report something. Usually what I've seen, and I you know, again, I can't say, I would never say in the first instance that it's widespread or it's universal, but I've definitely seen where usually what you will see is something along these lines is that either the first or second or early violation would be one of which you lose flexibility. So you may say, look, we're just not going to let you personally trade for the next 3 months, the next 6 months, or the next month, or whatever it is. What you have seen some firms do is that after that point in time when a violation does occur, that there is some more meaningful consequence, whether it be a penalty, a dollar penalty, a money penalty. I would say overwhelmingly when you see that to be the case, it's something that would be related to a contribution or a charitable contribution. So you're going to pay a $1,000 penalty and it goes to the charity of your choice. The other, I'd say, examples of penalties, it may be, you know, sort of, you know, you're going to, you know, detention, additional training, remedial training as it relates to the areas in which you've had a problem. I've definitely seen that to be the case. So this leads us sort of to the last couple of slides of our program for today, or seminar today, is sort of what role can technology play and how does it help? I think, you know, again, I mean, you know, we're you know, I've definitely drank the Kool-Aid, and sort of I'm a big proponent of technology in the workplace, as everybody knows, and I think, you know, again, it probably uses a too broad of a statement and makes everything easier. You know, it's just easier for employees to adhere to requirements, easier to commit, easier to do things that might have been really difficult in the past. So let's say, you know, if I have accounts at 20 different firms and I've got to go call 20 different firms and prepare 20 different letters to get them to pile loads of paper statements, or I have to bring my paper statements and, you know, input all this data about where I'm trading, it's a lot easier for me to go on an application and automatically link my firm to my compliance or employee supervision program and have that data go in. It takes me, you know, 5 minutes on each one, or a minute on each one, or 10 minutes, whatever it is, I'm not saying that it's never going to have problems, but it's a lot easier. I think it's also makes it a lot easier for a firm to demonstrate, that it's got a program and they're off the reservation. And it gets into a concept I'm going to talk about on the next slide. It's the monitor, tracking, and reporting. Again, it's also getting rid of paper-intensive stuff. Where you might, we talked about it in personal trading. I mean, I can tell you as a firm, because we've been active for years in the process. I mean, there would be times you'd get 10 years ago personal trading files, or 9 years ago, that would fill 5 boxes, and that just doesn't occur anymore, especially with clients of ours that use our solutions. I talked about just really it's easier to monitor, track, and follow up. Most applications, technological applications that are in the space, they provide dashboards where people who are responsible can go to the dashboard and see 20 different employees and who's done what and what's outstanding and how long is it outstanding and when was the last time we heard contact. So again, I think that is something that is really, really compelling about it. I think it also makes it easier to make it, again, we talked about the importance of an employee supervision program, is it's got to be a regular part of their life, of their work life. And when you're using it, and especially when you're using it like systems like we have where it's single sign-on, and it's like your HR system, it's like your Outlook, it's like your Word, it's like your Excel, it's like your PowerPoint. It's just, boom, it's on my screen. I pull it up and I do what I need to do. And again, revisiting that same concept of it's just got to be there to sort of to deal with change, to be modified. So it's easier to update and distribute when modifications are made. It's much easier to do that, and that's especially true at really large firms. So with that, I think we're about, 45 minutes in. We're all done for today, but I'm happy to answer any sort of questions that anybody has. Looks like what we got. Another question is, oh, well, thank you. What specific areas or tools or technology, and I guess I don't want to be too commercially biased here, but we're in the space, we think it's most applicable in the space around workflow and task management, and some common areas around that are vendor DD, cyber reviews, marketing doc reviews, and then obviously I've talked about it about, employee supervision and training. One other question, what if in your employee supervision program personal training is not relevant? Yeah, I mean, we actually, especially as we've built out the business, we have a lot of clients that personal training monitoring is not, and I would say technology solutions like ours, I know there are others out there, they usually have an element where you can take the piece that's useful, i.e. the policy management piece, the attestation piece, the questionnaires, the conflicts management piece, it could be, the political contributions, it could be online training. You can use all of that, but you just turn off the functionality as it relates to the personal trading. So I think we've seen a bunch of that. And we got another question. What is an example of an attestation that you'd suggest an investment advisor use monthly? I mean, again, I think in those, I wouldn't say, generally speaking, it's going to be dependent upon the program in question, so it's going to be unique. I think there are certain programs that, notwithstanding the Investment Advisors Act, may require more frequent reporting, even though the Advisors Act really only has quarterly transaction reports and annual holding report. I think what we've seen some people around attestations we've done is maybe as it relates to people that are involved in the marketing process. We're saying, hey, look, these are the only marketing materials that have been used this past month. They've all been properly reviewed from a compliance perspective. There's nothing outside the bar. I think to certain aspects we've seen some advisors maybe that are in the more illiquid space, and they're out there fundraising at a time, and they really want to sort of get out in front of people as it relates during their limited fundraising period. So say they're out fundraising for a year, they may have them make attestations, let's say, around political contributions, especially if they're active in raising money from state-sponsored institutional investors. So I think that is it. That's all the questions that we have for today. I want to thank everybody so much for participating. I really appreciate everybody taking the time. I want to thank everybody who submitted questions. That was really, really helpful. I hope it was helpful for you. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to reach out to us at Cordium. And again, thank you, and we will be in touch for future webinars. Thank you guys so much.